Chapter 10 A Christmas Carol. The gas street lamp flickered back on. Charles began pacing back and forth. "Come on, Jack," said Annie. "Let's go talk to him. Quick!" Jack packed up the violin and bow. Then he and Annie hurried down the hill to Charles. "Charles!" cried Annie. "Hello!" Charles whirled around. "Annie! Jack! You can't imagine what just happened!" His voice was shaking. "I had the strangest visions. 3 ghosts came to me. They showed me visions of myself in the past, the present, and the future." "Really?" said Annie. "That sounds like a scene in a book." Yes, it certainly does," Charles said, laughing and wiping his eyes. "The ghosts made me want to keep writing. They taught me that I can truly help the world with my books. I must go home. I must find a cab and go home and get to work at once. I cannot wait another day, another hour, another minute. I must write. I love to write." He laughed with joy. "Then I guess we'll be going home too," said Jack, smiling. "Our job is done here." "Shall I tell the cab to let you off somewhere?" asked Charles. "We need to go to Hyde Park," said Annie. "Wonderful, it's on the way. Come along," said Charles. He took off running up the hill, dashing ahead of Jack and Annie. When they caught up with him, they saw a horse and cab clattering over the cobblestones. "Stop, sir! Give us a ride, please!" Charles shouted to the driver. The driver brought his horse to a halt. Jack and Annie followed Charles to the cab. "Hyde Park, then 1 Devonshire Terrace. Please hurry," said Charles. The driver looked delighted. "Yes, Mr. Dickens, sir," he said. The 3 of them crowded into the cab, and the horse began to trot through the dark, foggy city, its hoofs clapping on the cobblestones. "Ah," said Charles, clapping his hands, "I know now that I shall write about. I will write a Christmas story about a man whose life is changed by 3 ghosts. The ghost of Christmas past, the ghost of Christmas present, and the ghost of Christmas future. What do you think of that?" "It sounds brilliant," said Jack. "I agree," said Charles. "I'll write about a greedy, selfish man who helps no one, like Mr. Pinch, but I'll call him, what shall I call him?" "How about Scrooge?" said Annie. "Wonderful name!" Charles laughed. "Mr. Scrooge, I love it. The 3 ghosts will change Scrooge's life. Do you like that idea?" "Love it," said Jack. "Good," said Charles. "I think I shall be able to write the story in time just for Christmas. Ha! Perhaps I'll call it A Ghost Story of Christmas." Or maybe you should just call it A Christmas Carol," said Jack. "Oh, I love that," said Charles. "Yes, perhaps I'll call it A Christmas Carol, and then underneath those words I'll write Being a Ghost Story of Christmas." "That sounds good," said Annie. "That should make people want to read it," said Charles. "Everyone loves a ghost story, don't they?" "Well," started Jack. "Of course they do," said Charles. "It all makes sense to me now. I will keep using my books to fight greed and cruelty. My pen is my sword. Except my books will never celebrate wars and fighting. They'll always show the joy and sorrows of real people. They'll show how good always triumphs over evil." "Great," said Jack. Charles sat back in his carriage seat and chuckled, his eyes shining in the lamplight. "I'm as light as a feather, as happy as an angel. Am I not the luckiest man on earth?" "I think you might be," said Annie. The horse came to a stop. "Hyde Park, Mr. Dickens, sir," the driver called down. "Well, Jack and Annie, I hope you have enjoyed your time with me. I trust I have been some help to you," said Charles. He sounded like the old Charles, pleased and proud of himself. Jack didn't mind. A happy Charles was much better than a sad one. "Yes," said Jack, "but we have to give this back to you." He pulled out the leather wallet that Charles had given them. "Thanks, but we don't need it." "Oh, no, please keep it," said Charles. "Buy food with the money. Buy boots. Buy books." "Actually, we have lots of books," said Jack. "And we have food at home and shoes and parents. We have everything we need." "Charles, please share it with others who aren't so lucky," said Annie. "Why, I don't know what to say," said Charles. "You 2 are the most extraordinary children I've ever met. Clearly, you have good, generous hearts. You already live the message I want to write in A Christmas Carol." Annie smiled. "Yeah, well, it's always good to be reminded," she said. I can't wait to read your story." "And where will you go now?" asked Charles. "Will you be safe?" "Yes, our parents take good care of us," said Jack. "You don't have to worry." "I shall never forget you," said Charles. "We won't forget you either," said Annie. "Goodbye, Charles." Jack and Annie hopped down from the cab and took off through the park. The fog was so thick it was impossible to see the treehouse. Jack couldn't even see Annie. He was relieved when she called out, "I found it!" Jack ran toward the sound of Annie's voice. She was already halfway up the ladder. As he started up after her, church bells began to bong, striking the hour. Jack and Annie climbed inside the treehouse and looked out the window, but there was nothing to see, nothing except the heavy fog. "Charles is going to be fine," said Annie. "Yep," said Jack with a smile. "He never even knew that it was us who helped him." "That's the best way to help someone, I think," said Annie. "Why?" asked Jack. "Then you know you're not helping them just to get a lot of credit," said Annie. "You're helping them because it's the right thing to do." Jack nodded. What Annie had just said felt true. "Ready to go home now?" he said. He picked up the Pennsylvania book. Annie nodded. Jack pointed to a picture of the Frog Creek woods. "I wish we could go home," he said. The wind began to blow. The treehouse started to spin. It spun faster and faster. Then everything was still. Absolutely still.